Good Sunday morning. It is Sunday, February the 4th, 2024. Loveanywhere.org. This is a website that is a service of First Christian Church in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. The congregation that I serve is a pretty brave group of people. They recognized that we were no longer being good stewards of the big giant building that we had in Rocky Mount in our church, and so we have sold it. And we are now nomadic. We're getting together in person several times a month for worship, for outreach service, some kind of service project, and also for fun. And we hope that you'll check back here, loveanywhere.org, regularly to see how you can participate wherever you are. If you're in Rocky Mount, please come join us. If you're elsewhere, please find ways to do the things that we're doing wherever you are. I invite you also to be in prayer for our congregation during this time when we're trying new things, and to offer us some feedback. The website is not at all the way that it's eventually going to be. These things take time, and they sort of evolve over time based on how people want to interact and what tools they use and what tools they don't. But for now, there's going to be about every other day, there's going to be a blog post, and then there will be occasional videos like this, and also a monthly podcast and some content for children. And the purpose of all of this is simply so that anyone who visits this site and participates in the life of our congregation knows that they're loved and that they have the capacity to love. Those things we feel are primary and very important. So we thank you for being here today. The text that I'm using today is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 29 to 39. Mark's Gospel is the shortest of the four. It was the first, and it is very short and choppy. Everything is very short little vignettes, and Jesus is here, and he does this thing, and then he goes somewhere else. And it's familiar for many of us who grew up in the church. These little stories, they sort of get in the back of your mind, and it's good to revisit them every now and then. Mark 1, 29 to 39. But if we took a quiz, flipping through a magazine or going through Facebook, and it popped up on a quiz, and they said, what did Jesus actually do? What things did Jesus do? My guess is that most of us would be able to say pretty confidently is that he healed people. He performed miracles. He did things that other people didn't do. And people came to him in one state of condition, and they left him in a different state of condition, always better than they were before. He came to Simon Peter's house on the Sabbath, and he found Peter's mother-in-law sick in bed. She'd been there for a long time, and she had a really high fever. I find it interesting that she had a high fever. How did they know? She was warm to the touch, yeah. She felt terrible, yeah. So Jesus came in, and he took her by the hand, and he lifted her up out of the bed, and immediately she cooled. She no longer had the fever. In fact, she felt so good, so much better, so much improved by touching Jesus that she served them all dinner. And news of that healing, that occasion, news about that, word about that, you know how these things go. One person whispers to another, and eventually the whole town showed up. This entire little town of Capernaum showed up to the front lawn at Simon Peter's house, and they were overwhelmed. The disciples were overwhelmed. Mark says that the whole city gathered around that door. And I've had some yard sales before, some garage sales. We've done some stuff at the house, but I can't imagine the whole town showing up at our front door. Have you ever done anything where the whole town showed up for it? I served a church in Wilson, North Carolina, Westview Christian Church, for about 4.5 years, and none of the predecessors that had been there before me made it quite that long, and I was determined I was going to make it longer than anybody else had. And they were good people when I got there, and they were good people when I left there. Honest, hardworking, kind. Were they any better at the end of those 4.5 years because I was there? I served Red Oak Christian Church in Greenville, North Carolina for almost twice that long. Were those people twice better off after I finished my time there? They were good Christians when I got there. They were good Christians when I left. Were they any gooder after? When you plant a row of seeds in a garden, at the end of the day, you can predict how much of that crop is eventually going to break out of the ground and grow for the harvest. You sort of know these things over time. But when you preach a sermon, or you say a kind word to somebody, or you hold a door, just a gesture for somebody else, how much has been done? And how much is left to do? For that person to know that they are loved and they have the capacity to love other people. I work with words. I don't have a John Deere tractor. The digging that I do isn't easily seen at the end of the work day. It goes from a paper napkin note at dinner on Tuesday into the pulpit or onto the video on the weekend. And I stand up in a pulpit and have a pounding little heart, and I'm eager and I'm excited and I gesture and I do all these things, wondering if it makes any difference whatsoever. And it's the same with any vocation, I guess. Any endeavor. Anything we decide to put ourselves into that we have a passion about, we try our best, right? Wondering if our best is best enough. Bill had not always been in a wheelchair. He was growing up and he was a happy kid and he was out playing basketball with his friends, and he woke up the next morning and he was unable to walk ever again. Stuck there, permanently a teenager in his body. And that kind of tragedy can make you bitter, or it can make you better. And he chose to make him better. And eventually he earned a doctoral degree, and he's a teacher. His mother, of course, says he's the best person I know. But everybody says Bill is the best person that they know. Thoughtful, funny, kind. Loved by his students. Loved by members of his church. In fact, his church, were listening to this text from Mark one Sunday. And two of Bill's friends kind of leaned into each other during it, and they said, what would you do if you were Jesus? If I were Jesus? Yeah, what would you do if you had healing ability like that? Well, I guess I'd try to do the things that Jesus did. You can't improve on that a whole lot. And the other guy said, well, I think if I had the power to heal, I would heal Bill. And they both sat there for a minute in the quiet, picturing Bill getting up out of his wheelchair and standing up straight and tall. If I were Jesus, yeah, that's what I'd do, they said. Which raised the question, why didn't Jesus do it? If you heard that somebody in your town was healing people, and people were swearing by it left and right, they had been there, of course you'd take somebody that you knew was sick and you'd take them over there. You'd find somebody in a wheelchair and you'd get out there and push them over to that place. You would go to that place where that person was healing the sick. Maybe you'd take yourself. Whatever it is that ails you. Can you imagine standing there and having that healer, that person, look you in the eye and say, how can I serve you? Everybody in that small town of Capernaum where Jesus was found a reason to be outside that door, to be healed, where Jesus was, hoping that he could heal them. And he did heal, apparently late into the night, just overwhelmed, curing many who were sick, casting out demons, the text says. Improving lives from where they were before. And he was a sensation, and the consequence of that sensation was that it created a crisis. He was overwhelmed, and so he sneaked out the screen door in the back and went out even before the sun came up to pray. Mark tells us that he was tempted in a wilderness. Doesn't give us a lot of details. We flip over to the Gospel of Luke, and the evil one, the tempter, the same word in Greek that's used to describe a corrupt government official, describes the tempter. This evil one tempted Jesus. Turn those stones into bread, he says, which would be a good thing. Imagine if any person could take all the stones. I mean, there's hundreds of stones just lying around everywhere. If we could turn those into bread, we would feed the whole world. That'd be a good thing, wouldn't it? And behind the suggestion is that Jesus can satisfy his own needs. He can satisfy everybody's needs. And goodness knows, he must have wrestled with that temptation. It's not called a temptation unless it's tempting, right? Turn those stones into bread, Jesus, if you are who you say you are. Tempting. Man does not live by bread alone, he says, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. I don't know. I mean, Jesus' response was a recognition of the difference between the things that are temporal, temporary, and those that are eternal, everlasting, right? Feed somebody today and you need to feed him again. Give him the word of hope and he can live forever. Teach a man to fish, right? Does that mean we have no obligation to feed the hungry? No, of course not. Scripture says that anybody that asks, we need to give. But both he and we know there's a difference between that which fills the belly and that which feeds the soul. One lasts a few hours, the other forever. See, feeding people is a both and, not an either or. And maybe that's the lesson today. Maybe that's what we're working toward, you and I. We who try to give a good word, we who try to be kind, we who try to be described like Bill's mom described Bill. From the pulpit or the phone call or the job or the Facebook post, trying to be a positive influence when we can. Maybe we want something that lasts. Think back to that evening in Capernaum. Think back to Jesus healing the sick. Think of the wonder in their faces, the gratitude, the crippled arms that now have strength again. People who hadn't walked in years suddenly walking about, whirling about, dancing about, running and running. Think of those who were doubled over in sickness, standing up, covered with cuts and bruises and now not at all. You can't tell a thing. People dying of disease and suddenly being healthy and strong. Could there be anything on earth more satisfying than that? Having that power and using it for that purpose. The response would have been overwhelming, enormous, and of course it was. News spread like wildfire, and that's what everybody wanted from Jesus. It was overwhelming in a negative sense, devastating, crushing. So he slipped out the back door and went to pray. Healing people is such an obvious need. The town I live in, near here, just about every corner are two different competing medical groups, just trying to put up more clinics than the other guy. The need is there. People were so obviously grateful for it. He could spend the rest of his days, Jesus, just healing people. Never run out of need and never run out of appreciation. It's a pretty good life. But praying in that deserted place early in the morning, he came to the realization that all healing is temporary. It's wonderful, but it's impermanent. We get well, but we get sick again. We stand up, but we fall down again. And in the end, these mortal bodies of ours surrender to our mortality. Even if we'd been healed by Jesus 50 times in 100 years, we still die. And maybe it was that realization, maybe it was that thought that made him ready to go back when the disciples came running and said, "Where have you been? We've been looking for you all night. Everybody's looking for you. We're ready to put up a clinic. We're going to put it right here in Capernaum. We're going to build a nice big building. We're going to have a nice comfortable waiting room. It's going to be awesome. Big parking lot. We'll put up a sign that says, 'Real miracles, sensibly priced.'" We got a whole marketing plan, Jesus. Let's go. Everybody's looking for you. Nah, let's go to the other side. the other towns around here. I want to preach there too. That's what I came to do. Oh. Doesn't he know? In the discipline of prayer, Jesus wrestled with temptation and he remembered his mission. He had not come just to heal the sick. He came also to establish God's kingdom. So day after day, you and I say a good word. Week after week, Sunday after Sunday, we step into our own pulpits and we hope that we make a difference. We hope that it's not that sudden dramatic difference that everybody talks about the next day, but that imperceptible, over time, nurturing kind of difference that works in a person's life like a straight row of seed planted firmly in the ground until over time something eventually comes of it. That's what we hope for, we followers of Jesus, and that's why we keep preaching, you and I. You're all preachers too. You all testify to things in your life. And I'm betting you've done some things that have been pretty healing too. I think of those two church people in Bill's situation. Why doesn't Jesus just heal him? I don't know. I don't know why bad things happen to all people. But I do know that Bill can be healing in his life by doing what he does with kindness and grace, loving other people and being loved by other people. And I think that's the point. Saying a positive word when somebody needs it, picking up the bill when somebody's feeling low, a phone call, a bowl of soup for your sick neighbor, those things are healing and loving. And we all hope that through the foolishness of what we say or what we do, a good word might be heard and somebody's life will be improved. Maybe somebody would even remember something that you tell them today.